Now to introduce Rick actually and the content, my wife Doris Hamburg will do that. Doris was the Director of Preservation Projects at NARA. She's been involved in many conservation projects, including the Iraqi Jewish Archive, and she's been helping to preserve the Dead Sea Scrolls, many trips to Israel. So Doris, can you take over, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Jerry. Many of you may have read the book People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks, which is a fictionalized history of the splendid Sarajevo Haggadah, a manuscript that was purported to have been uncovered, the history of which was uncovered during the conservation treatment of that treasure. While the historical travels of the book, its history, were imagined in that novel, the conservation work of that manuscript was very real, and it did go through conservation treatment, which in itself, the treatment has a very intriguing story. And the conservation treatment of what we will hear about today also has a very intriguing story, which is why we are here today. Conservation of other Jewish manuscripts. Locally, we have the Washington Haggadah, which also has a story. And there are Jewish objects, archaeological sites, a wide variety of Jewish objects in multitude of formats, which are being preserved all over the world today, revealing many, many different kinds of stories and intriguing puzzles. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing about the rescue and conservation of what's called the Lost Mural, and you'll learn what that means. I really want to thank Rick Kerschner for agreeing to present this class about the fascinating mural and the whole project, which I first heard about some months ago only, but it's been going on a very long time, you'll hear. I also would like to add the Jewish Studies Center's appreciation to the Washington Conservation Guild for co-sponsoring this class. I really appreciate their help with it. So Rick is presenting the talk on behalf of himself and Connie Silver. By way of background, Richard Kerschner is the principal of Kerschner Museum Conservation Services, LLC, which consults nationally and internationally. And some of the projects include the Palace Museum in Beijing and Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. He has extensive experience in preventive conservation and conservation project management. And he's recognized nationally for his expertise in collections-based, practical and sustainable environmental control for museums, in historic structures, and LED lighting for museums. He's on, I'm sure, on the speed dial of many people. He retired in 2015 as Shelburne's Director of Conservation and Preservation, where he was for 32 years. And Rick is also a fellow of the American Institute of Conservation, which he has served very much over the years. Rick is, in presenting this talk, he's also very much looking forward to taking your questions, which he will do at the end of the presentation. At any time during the talk, please, if you think of a question or a comment, jot it down in the chat, address it to everybody. So please write it in the chat. And so I think with that, I would like to turn over the program to Rick Kerschner to tell us about the rescue and conservation of the lost mural.
Let me interrupt here for a second before Rick takes over. I forgot to mention one important point. This whole session is being recorded, and that means that includes the chat. So anything you put in the chat will also be recorded, and the whole presentation is recorded. Okay, Rick, sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, Jerry and Doris. Hopefully everybody can see and hear me. This presentation was written for and presented to fellow professional museum and private conservators at the annual meeting of the American Institute for Conservation, held in Montreal in May of 2016. Members of the Washington Conservation Guilds have also been invited to join this class. For these reasons, it contains some technical terms and names of specific materials that conservators use that may only be familiar to conservators. I've tried to explain such terms as they're introduced throughout the presentation, but some of the terms and materials may be described and more fully explained later in my talk. And I'll go to share screen. And you should be seeing the, let's see, there you go. Is the screen up? Is the photo up? Okay, good. In October of 1986, a few years after I began working at Shelburne Museum in Vermont as their first conservator, I was contacted by Aaron Goldberg, a local lawyer and volunteer archivist at the Ohavie Zedek Synagogue in Burlington, Vermont. He requested that I visit the old Chi Adams Synagogue that had been commissioned in 1939 and repurposed as first a dry goods store and later a carpet shop and warehouse. The building had been sold and was in the process of being retrofitted as 6 apartments. I was invited to advise on condition and possible disposition of an 11-foot high by 20-foot wide by 8-foot deep triptych mural. That's a mural painted on 3 walls, painted on plaster walls in the asphalt. When I arrived, the 2nd floor of the upstairs apartment was already in place and I could approach the mural on its level. The decorated walls and ceilings that had survived for 47 years after the shul closed had already been gutted, and the owner was ready to destroy the large mural that was in his way. Mr. Goldberg was desperately seeking for a way to save the mural, possibly by arranging for its transfer to another organization that could move it to a safe and accessible location. Although the colors were muted by darkened varnish, the mural was in good structural condition with only minor losses to the paint, as you can see in this picture. There were some cracks in the paint and a few areas of paint were pulling away from the plaster, but the plaster seemed well adhered to the lath, the strips of wood beneath. I recognized that the relocation of the mural would be a huge and expensive effort, and after consulting with Shelburne Museum's director, informed Mr. Goldberg that the mural did not fit with Shelburne's collecting mission, and the museum was not interested in moving the mural. However, I did advise that an alternative to destroying the mural was to build a false wall in front of it, so that it might be recovered at a later date. I advised that doing so could create an unfavorable climate around the mural and it could hasten the mural's deterioration, but that would still be preferable to destroying it. I also advised on how to best protect the mural before building the wall. Aaron convinced the owner that this was a reasonable solution to the dilemma. The wall was constructed and the conversion of the building to apartments was completed. Aaron could not forget about the mural, and over the next 25 years, he continued to research its history. The building interior had been painted by a young Lithuanian poet, performer, playwright, and artist named Ben Zion Joseph Black in 6 months in 1910 for the sum of $200. This only historic photo of Chi Adams' early interior shows the original painted walls. The entire ceiling was also painted as a blue open sky complete with birds. Other walls contained musical instruments and cherubs. Black's 2 daughters, one of whom was a longtime personal assistant to architect I.M. Pye, donated funds to have the mural professionally photographed before the wall was erected. In 2010, Aaron and his co-archivist, Jeff Potash, formed the Lost Shul Mural Committee at Ohavie Zedek Synagogue, but were unable to obtain the rights to the mural from the building owner at that time. In November of 2012, the apartment building containing the mural was sold, and the new owner agreed to donate the mural to Ohavie Zedek if the Lost Shul Mural Committee would remove it and restore the building and apartment. The mural is located at the end of the building, the east end of the building, directly on the other side of the slate roof. An apse is defined as a semicircular or vaulted recess, especially the sanctuary end of a house of worship. So this is the apse here and here. Throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to the apse roof, as that is the section of the building that contains the mural and that needed to be removed in one piece to save the mural. Mojave Zedek rented the 3-bedroom apartment that contained the mural, and the wall was opened. The insulation was peeled back to reveal a very fragile paint layer and detached paint. The surface of the mural had not been properly protected by a plastic sheet as recommended, and fiberglass insulation had been placed directly against the paint in many areas. As the mural was carefully uncovered, it was indeed disturbing to observe its condition. Large areas of paint were flaking from the plaster. Flaking paint, that looks like cornflakes in these photos, is caused by the loss of adhesion between the paint and the plaster, usually caused by extremes in the environment. It was aggravated for many years by conditions that were too hot or too cold, or too damp or too dry in the empty wall cavity between the slate roof and the painted mural. However, close comparison to detailed photos from 1986 indicated that the area with the worst flaking had actually shown cracks through the paint and paint beginning to detach even before it was walled up. This comparison of the tablets shows the significance of the damage. The surface of the mural had deteriorated more in those 26 years behind a protective wall than in the 76 years it was open and visible on the ceiling of the synagogue and warehouse. What had been estimated as about 4 square feet of paint loss in 1986 of the total 155 square foot painting had increased to about 15 square feet, with paint actively flaking over the entire mural. We chose to look on the bright side. 90% of the mural's paint did survive, and the flaking paint could most likely be reattached to the plaster. Once the mural was uncovered in late 2012, Aaron once again requested my advice on conserving the mural, specifically to recommend possible conservators and review their treatment proposals. The Lost Shul Mural Committee expanded to include an architect and myself, and research on the feasibility of extracting and restoring the mural and raising the required funds began in earnest. Dr. Samuel, an internationally recognized expert on Jewish art and the historic preservation of Jewish sites and monuments, was engaged to research the historical significance of this mural. He concluded, and I quote, "The mural is a rare survivor of the rich Jewish artistic tradition in Eastern Europe. This world of Jewish art was nearly completely destroyed in the Holocaust and remains poorly understood. It is a rare and striking painting, one of only a small number of extant synagogue murals in North America, painted by an immigrant Jewish artist for congregations that were still tied to their distant homelands, the Yiddish language, and traditional Jewish religious practice. Nothing quite like this survives in Europe, and no mural in the United States equals the Lost Shul mural in size, scope, completeness, and Jewish meaning. Only a few highly damaged painted fragments survive from all the synagogues in Lithuania, most notably from Chaipaska, the town of origin for many of Burlington's Jews." End quote. Mural conservator Constance S was selected and began examination, documentation, and treatment of the mural in January of 2014. She worked through May to consolidate and reattach flaking paint, perform cleaning tests, and remove darkened varnish and dirt from selected portions of the mural. After extensive testing, Connie settled on a consolidation technique she had used successfully in the early 1990s on a monumental oil on plaster mural in the State Supreme Court of New York, located in Manhattan. Like the benzoin black mural, oil paint was applied to unprimed plaster, and its deterioration was markedly similar. The chosen consolidant was called BIVA D8, an aqueous, non-ionic dispersion of ethylene vinyl acetate, emulsified by a solvent that evaporates during drying. That's for you conservators. Consolidate for conservation purposes means to secure or strengthen. By consolidating the flaking paint, I mean to relax and reglue the flakes of paint back down to the plaster. A consolidant is the adhesive that is used to secure and strengthen the paint layer. Connie used her previously perfected technique to reattach the flaking paint to the plaster. The area to be treated was misted with distilled water with a drop of woolite added as a wetting agent, essentially to make water wetter and flow better. And that's what you see on the left. A small atomizer that creates a very fine mist was used rather than a sprayer because large sprayed water droplets would have disturbed the fragile flakes of paint, knocking some of them off. Misting wet all the surfaces of the deformed paint, and the wetting relaxed and detached the curled paint. Capillary action pulled the paint flakes back onto the plane of the plaster. So even as she sprayed this, she could see the paint flakes flaking and starting to lie back down. The BIVA D8 white emulsion adhesive was diluted 50% in distilled water. And this is shown on the right, barely touching the fragile flaking paint. The BIVA was flowed onto the wetted surface from an eyedropper or a soft brush. The adhesive followed the path of the wetting agent, surrounding and penetrating behind each flake. The relaxed, curled, and flaking paint was then gently pressed back into plane using a baby wipe. The soft baby wipe allowed manipulation of the paint without sticking and also absorbed excess adhesive from the paint surface. This was an important step required to avoid gluing grime and discolored varnish to the surface of the painting, which would complicate and eventually remove the eventual removal of such accretions. On the right, firm pressure was applied to the treated area with a flexible rubber bone folder through silicone release mylar film to coax flakes flat and confirm the bond between the paint and the plaster. This thin, transparent nylon film, or mylar film, did not stick to the surface and allowed the surface to be viewed during treatment. A hot tacking iron is used to further relax the paint and ease the treated area back into plane, then heat set the adhesive that had flowed around behind the flakes of paint, effectively reattaching them to the plaster. This all probably sounds pretty complicated to non-conservators, but it's a pretty traditional way of relaxing such paint and laying it back down. A small travel iron was used to confirm the adhesion of larger contiguous areas of treated paint to the plaster. A detail of the sun before and after consolidation is on the right. Consolidation proceeded slowly in small areas from the base of each panel to the top. Paint cross sections, small samples of about 1/8 inch square, were extracted from the mural painted surface and submitted to a conservator, Susan Buck, for analysis. First, to guide the complicated cleaning process, and later to identify areas of possible overpaint. Susan first mounted the small samples in a hard resin and then polished, examined, and photographed them through a microscope to produce these two cross sections. They identify the paint stratigraphy as 3 to 4 layers of early distemper paint directly on top of the plaster, followed by a thin coat of off-white paint and 3 more coats of tan distemper paint. Distemper paint is a paint that is made of pigments mixed with protein-based mediums such as hide glue or egg yolk or egg white. The mural oil painting was applied on top of these earlier distemper layers, which is right here, and consisted of a white base coat, followed by 2 layers of design colors and 2 layers of varnish on top. A total of 18 paint samples were analyzed, and later paint samples showed the selected use of original glazes between the top paint layer and the varnish. So right here you see what's a brown glaze, which is pigment kind of mixed in with the varnish. Solvent testing indicated that the varnish layers were soluble in xylene, isopropanol, and benzyl alcohol, or various combinations thereof, and these are relatively common solvents to use to clean varnish for paintings. This slideshow shows one of the several methods using solvent gels to remove the varnish and clean coal soot and grime from cracks in the paint. Viewing from the slide at the top left and moving clockwise, dirt and old varnish were removed by applying the benzyl alcohol-based solvent gel through a piece of wet strength tissue. How long the solvent-laden wet strength tissue was left in place varied depending on the thickness of the varnish and the sensitivity of the underlying paint colors and glazes. After the tissue was removed, dissolved varnish and soot were gently dislodged with a brush and cleaned from the surface using cotton. These photographs show 3 different levels of cleaning. The first level is removing the darkest oil-based varnish revealed other technical issues. And here's the dark varnish before any cleaning. These are windows that are being opened up by the first cleaning. The grime layer that is strongly adhered to the surface of the mural painted by the varnish is the most complex cleaning problem. Many compositional areas of the mural painting are sensitive to cleaning agents. All black, brown, and many red paints are quite sensitive. The brown architectural columns and pediments are very sensitive because they are painted using multiple layers of thin colored glazes. Although complete removal of the dirt and darkened varnish is possible, all of these areas require slow and careful cleaning. You see that these are about 2 to 4 square inches, each of these tests, and this entire mural is 155 square feet. Consolidation was completed and about 50% of the darkened varnish was removed by the end of May 2014. Cleaning was not completed at this time, as funds were still being raised to cover the cost of conserving and moving the mural. The cleaned windows created by removing discolored and dirty varnish layers helped fund fundraising efforts, as they were tantalizing clues to the colors yet to be uncovered. So here's a 1986 mural, and you see it looks like it has green curtains, where actually when this yellow-brown varnish is taken off, the curtains are a traditional blue. What looks like orange curtains were actually a deep rose color. One of the most striking is these terrible brown curtains are actually a light purple color with dark purple fringes. The sun, actually the beams are not yellow and orange, but yellow and green. And the tablets are a much brighter red, this one being cleaned. By early June of 2014, the local fundraising committee had secured sufficient funds to proceed with the move, and a Lost Shul mural project team was expanded to include a consulting engineer, general contractor, steel fabricators, and a rigger and crane service that moves big things. I was retained to advise on historic and conservation materials and coordinate conservation treatments to prepare the mural to be moved. 2 full-time carpenters were hired for 18 months to separate the entire apse roof section that contained the mural from the building and to restore the historic structure by building a new apse roof after the mural was removed to Ohavi Zedek Synagogue. It was estimated it would take 8 to 12 months to prepare the mural to move, so it was necessary to work through the winter. Since the mural was painted on a plaster on lath ceiling attached to the inside of the rafters that supported the slate roof, the entire apse roof structure would have to be removed in one piece. A protective structure had to be built around the apse before work could begin to remove the slate roof and sheathing to open the mural from the back. The protective structure was minimally heated to allow the construction of a steel support structure around the mural over the winter. The structure was completed well before one of the coldest and snowiest winters on record. Windows were included to allow light into the occupied first floor apartment because there was agreement with the landlord that only the top apartment would remain unoccupied. And sliding doors on the second floor provided access for materials and the large steel beams. A unique design requirement was that the roof be removable so that the crane could pick out the apse roof section of the building that contained the mural once it was safely enclosed in its steel cage. Meanwhile, inside the building, work progressed on preparing the mural for the move. Several sections of plaster borders surrounded the three main panels of the mural had to be removed from the support lath so that the apse roof could be separated from the rest of the building and the steel cage could be built. So this is the area where the apse attaches to the building and where it'll be separated. Since there was a border to the mural here and down here at the bottom, that plaster had to be removed and saved for later so that this section of the building could be cut away. Although the plaster appeared well adhered to the lath, tests indicated it was not strong plaster, so a double facing of silk crepeline and a wax-like material, cyclododecane, reinforced with fiberglass mesh, was applied before the plaster was separated from the lath by sawing through the keys using a hacksaw blade. I'll better describe the facing process in a few minutes. The effectiveness of the facing was inadvertently tested when pressure on the front of the plaster caused the keys to break and a section of plaster slipped down the wall to the floor. This is a piece that slipped down and broke on the floor. Although it broke into three sections, it was held together by the strong facing. So a facing is material that is glued to the front of the paint to hold it together, and also, in this case, to hold the plaster together in case something like this happens. This slide shows the steps of the procedure to further secure the plaster borders for removal and wrap them for storage. So each one was set on top of a piece of plywood and sandwiched between other pieces of plywood. The front facing that's holding this paint and plaster all together is reinforced with pieces of wood glued in place, then it's all wrapped. The left side shows conservator Connie Silver and master carpenter Ray Connor cutting the faced and reinforced plaster border below the mural into smaller sections to facilitate removal of the plaster from the lath supports. The right side shows the detached sections of the plaster supported on sheets of plywood and wrapped for storage. Only the plaster borders surrounding the mural were removed from the lath in this manner to allow the roof and the apse to be cut free from the building. These sections of plaster can be conserved and reattached to the mural on new supports, but that is a difficult and labor-intensive procedure. The next few slides will show the efforts made to ensure the layers of plaster on which the mural was painted did not detach from the laths during or after the move. So these border sections that were peripheral to the main mural were the only ones where the plaster was removed from the laths in the wall. We didn't want that to happen to the rest of the mural. So what am I talking about plaster on lath? This photo shows the back of the plaster on lath ceiling wall on which the mural is painted. A section of the slate and the original roof sheathing boards had to be removed to examine the back of the wall and evaluate the condition of the plastic keys. The historic method of applying plaster to a ceiling or wall was to first nail wooden laths to the wall and ceiling joists. And you can see we're looking at the back of the laths right now. They were nailed from the other side, from the inside, to these joists. Plaster keys were formed when wet plaster fills the space between the wooden laths and curls around the back of the edges of the laths before the plaster sets. Once set, these plaster keys lock the layer of plaster to the front of the laths. If the plaster is weak and these keys start to break, then the entire layer of plaster can fall from the laths. We certainly did not want this to happen during the move. And in fact, all the steps we took from here forward to make sure that if there was some sort of jolt during the move and plaster did detach, that it would still be held in place and we could hopefully reattach it. Historic preservation scientist Norman Weiss on the right and conservator Irving Slavitt's Center of Monument Conservation Collaborative Materials Incorporated were contracted to analyze the plaster, develop methods to strengthen the plaster keys, and perform the work. Here you see them with Connie Silver, the painting's conservator. I think this is the first time you get to see her face. Their analysis of samples indicated that the plaster was sandy and quite weak. They recommended strengthening the keys from the back with 3 applications of a product called Conservator HCT, which stands for hydroxylating conversion treatment, developed by Mr. Weiss to strengthen historic stone and weak plaster. To access the back of the mural, the slates and wooden sheathing, where the slates numbered and restored for replacement on the new roof. Great care was taken to cut rather than pull nails so as not to move the rafters and risk the breaking of the fragile plaster keys. On close examination of the back of the lath and plaster, Weiss and Slavitt also recommended extending the keys or making them larger over the back of the laths using a product called Void Scan CG70 fine grout. Starting in the up left and moving clockwise, these photos show the test wall section on which new keys were created using the Void Span fine grout. That's right here. It's a test section to see how that would work. Then the application of the HTC to strengthen the existing keys. We couldn't apply the grout to keys that were already quite weak, so they had to be strengthened. Then the application of the grout to extend the keys, and you see how they're dripping down to make keys over the back that will hold the plaster in the front. And then here's the wall after the plaster keys have been strengthened and extended. It was essential that all possible measures be taken to prevent any movement within the wall structure that supported the plaster on lath wall on which the mural was painted. As the original sheathing boards were removed, the roof structure was made more rigid and strengthened by reinforcing all of the plastic attachments with steel angle brackets. Here, 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 here. As they removed the boards, they could feel that these joists were moving. And that's the last thing we wanted to happen because we wanted no vibration against this plaster wall. So the carpenter reinforced every one of these with steel plates. 1/2-inch MDO plywood was chosen to replace the old sheathing boards to better stabilize the entire structure. After the roof structure was completely enclosed, a product called Marvel Seal 360 was heat sealed to the plywood to slow humidity changes within the roof structure. Back inside, facings were applied to protect and secure the paint and plaster during the move. A silk crepeline fabric that was very strong, a facing was made of that, was glued to the paint layer using a reversible adhesive called acryloid B67. The silk and adhesive secured the paint layer, but not necessarily the plaster layer. It was decided that stronger facing was required to hold the plaster together in the event that the mural was jarred during movement and causing the plaster keys to fail and the plaster to separate from the wooden laths. A self-adhering, peel-away fiberglass mesh designed for repairing drywall was applied on top of the silk, and you see some of this mesh up in this area. It was applied in 2 by 2 foot squares, and then it was covered with molten cyclododecane. The wax-like material, it melts at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Solid cyclododecane was heated to melting in a double boiler and applied as a liquid with large paintbrushes to the thickness of about 1/8 of an inch. The beauty of cyclododecane is that it forms a strong and hard protective layer, but when exposed to air, it slowly sublimes, changes directly from a solid to a gas without going through the liquid phase. Over a few months, it completely disappears from the surface like magic without any use of solvents or mechanical manipulation that might cause damage to the paint. Here's the mural with the cyclododecane fiberglass mesh facing partially completed. Connie Silver had previously used cyclododecane to consolidate small fragments of Egyptian mud plaster wall murals that she treated in 2006. Although seldom used to secure a mural of this scale, our research revealed that in 2002, a team of conservators led by Perry Houston used cyclododecane reinforced with gauze to face the 1932 David Sequeiros mural painted on Portland cement in preparation for its move to the Santa Barbara Museum in Los Angeles. We think we have a problem moving a mural on plaster and lath. They moved a mural on cement. A 30-minute video of the project was released by the Getty Conservation Institute in November of 2012 and is available, of course, on YouTube. The project was not published, and we only found a video after we had already used cyclododecane to face our mural. It is astounding how similar these two mural projects were and that we reached similar solutions quite independently. A steel framework was custom built around the apse roof section that contained the mural assembly following plans created by Engineering Ventures, the project's engineering firm. Though such frameworks usually are designed to restrict movement and of the protected structure to 1/10 of an inch, this framework was designed to restrict movement to 1/100th of an inch because of the fragility of the plaster keys. Metal beams were cut to size on site. A 23-foot beam that extended across the front of the mural had to be threaded into place through a window cut in the wall. Although attempts were made to limit welding to off-site and bolt the structure together around the mural, that proved much too complicated. So welding was performed on-site using protective blankets and special fire watch during and after each welding session. Any type of use of flames anywhere near historic structure is not good, but this is the only thing we could do. The frame was required not only to secure the mural during the removal and transport, but also to house the mural assembly so it could be suspended from the ceiling of the lobby of Ohavi Zedek Synagogue. As the framework was being constructed, polyethylene sheet was secured over the mural to prevent the cyclododecane from subliming too quickly and to provide a barrier between the mural and the foam pads that would further protect and secure the plaster during the move. A beam across the front of the mural was required to stabilize the framework during the move and to support a floor in front of the mural that was necessary to facilitate bracing of the foam pads. Foam padded panels were built to secure the plaster in place in case plaster keys broke, once again, during the move. They were constructed of MDO plywood covered in 1.5-inch urethane open cell foam wrapped with Tyvek house wrap. The panels were pressed firmly against the mural and temporarily braced while a wooden frame was built to secure them in place. A wooden frame was built to allow pressure to be evenly applied to compress the foam against the plaster. The panels were hinged to each other so they could be carefully tilted back from the top down to check for any loose plaster as they were being removed. You can see the hinges right here. While the mural was being prepared to move, the lobby of the Hohavi synagogue was being prepared to receive it. The synagogue is the classic post-modern built in 1952. Although not designed to house the mural, the lobby is a perfect height and width to display it. In fact, the mural fit through the glassed-in opening with just 1 inch to spare. This engineer's drawing shows the scale of the mural installed in the foyer at almost its original viewing height, a very important consideration because of the trompe l'oeil character of the painting. In other words, this painting had been painted to be viewed from below, and various ways of foreshortening images and all were used so that it would appear real when viewed from below. A steel beam superstructure had to be fabricated and installed in the lobby to support the suspended mural assembly that weighed 6,500 pounds. A sturdy platform was built in front of the entrance to receive the mural. The glass wall had to be removed for the mural to enter the lobby and then rebuilt. After over 9 months of preparation, moving day, May 6, 2015, on bright, warm, and sunny. It was estimated that the move could take up to 11 hours, so the crane was placed by 8 a.m., lifted off the roof of the protective structure a half hour later. The roof was settled on rollers and pushed down the street and out of the way. Lifting straps and chains were attached to lifting points on the steel frame. The frame had been jacked up a few inches the day before to ensure it was no longer attached to the building. Once the steel enclosed roof was completely supported by the crane, that entire roof section could be easily pushed away from the building. Once separated from the building, the roof of the apse floated slowly upwards. 7 minutes into the lift, it had cleared the walls of the protective structure. Note the placement of the large and small spanner bars above the mural to ensure the structure did not tilt as it was lifted. A few minutes later, it was lowered to the waiting truck. Once placed on the truck, a cross-section of the faced mural and support structure was visible. The steel frame is labeled in yellow. The Marvel seal covers the plywood backing to mitigate humidity changes within the roof cavity. The ends of the laths, nailed to the front of the rafters, are visible here. The layer of plaster on which the mural is painted, which is right here, covers the laths. It's now possible to view what I've been terming the keys, where the plaster goes in between the laths and drips down around the back. These keys are all that's securing the layer of plaster to the ceiling, and it's now more apparent why the keys had to be strengthened, extended, and everything. Black zip tape is being applied to further secure the edges of the plaster and lath. The foam padding is pressed and held securely to the face of the mural by the wooden frame. As the truck slowly moved away from the building, the roof was rolled forward and the crane lifted it back into place. The re-roofed structure would protect the now open end of the building until the new apse roof could be constructed, completed with the original slate roof. The completed apartment was turned back to the owner at the end of June 2015, about a month later. Trees had been trimmed back from the road. Potholes had been filled to ensure a smooth ride for the delicate cargo. The slow, careful, and uneventful 3/10 of a mile journey to a Havi Zedek synagogue took only about 15 minutes. As soon as the crane had replaced the roof on the protective structure, it drove to a Havi Zedek and to the end of a temporary access road that had been built across the lawn at the site. This panorama photo shows the temporary road in front of the synagogue and the positioning of the crane and the truck on the building site, so that it was on the, it had to be moved up into the sidewalk so that the crane could lift and transport the mural unimpeded from the truck to the receiving platform in front of the lobby. The truck had to drive up this wide entrance walk in front of the synagogue to position the mural within safe reach of the crane. Steel plates covered the concrete walkway to protect it from cracking under the weight of the truck and mural. Lifting harness was reattached and the mural was lifted from the truck and moved to the platform. Several methods of moving the mural to the truck, from the truck to the building had been discussed, including using forklifts to lift the mural, drive it to the lobby, and raise it into position. But after much discussion, all agreed that the safest method was to attach temporary wheels to the bottom of the steel support structure, then use manpower to roll the 7,500-pound structure into the lobby and carefully maneuver it into position. The mural rolled into the opening with 1 inch of clearance at the top. This is Orrin Gutman, the proud engineer who designed and supervised the construction of the steel support structure, immensely relieved that the move had been completed without so much as a bump to the mural. Although it would be more than 2 weeks before the protective padding could be removed, we were confident that no damage to the plaster would be found, as the mural had been under close observation from the time it separated from the apartment building until it was positioned in the Havi Zedek lobby. The entire move that was planned for 8 to 11 hours had been completed in less than 4 hours, a testament to meticulous planning. A week later, 4 chain lifts were suspended from the steel support beam, and the steel framework containing the mural was lifted to its permanent viewing height of 10 feet, nearly the same height from which it was last viewed by men praying in the Kai Adams Synagogue in 1939. The mural was suspended from 5 3/4-inch diameter steel rods. They look awfully thin, but each of these rods alone is rated at greater than the 6,500-pound weight of the mural. The foam pads were carefully removed, and there was no evidence of any loosening or detachment of the plaster. The plywood floor was removed, and the 10 stiffening beams in front support beam were unbolted and removed from the rest of the structure. We conservators had predicted that the cyclododecane would sublime in about 3 months, so the grand unveiling was planned for early August. This composite photo shows the progression of the sublimation with the gradual reappearance of the painted surface. So it was brought in on the 6th of May. On the 5th of June, some had already sublimed. You could start seeing the mural behind. Here we are 1 month later, 2 weeks later, and finally at the end of July, with the cyclododecane nearly completely gone. This is how the mural appeared at the unveiling ceremony in early August 2015, with the silk crepeline facing still in place. So you can pretty well see through the silk, and it was not removed at this point. That was a much longer project. The fiberglass mesh with some cyclododecane along the edges in the lower right-hand corner was left in place as a visual aid to explain how the mural was protected for the move. This view of the back of the mural shows the steel support structure and suspending rods. Lumilex 2024 dedicated LED track lights from Lighting Specialties Incorporated are visible on the west wall, as are Hunter Douglas designer screen shades that block 90% of the western light when lowered in the late afternoon. Of course, we don't want the mural to fade over the years, so we need to block out as much of the light as possible. As the temperature at the height of the mural was about 15 degrees warmer than at visitor level, a destratification fan was mounted at the ceiling peak to promote even mixing of the air. Real-time temperature and humidity readings from sensors mounted high and low on the wall are transmitted to the internet by a Hobo RX3000 remote monitoring station. Temperature data is used to optimize the speed of the fan for effective mixing while keeping fan noise. Mural conservator Connie Silver returned in November of 2015 to refine cleaning methods to completely remove discolored varnish and grime from a total of about 10 square feet of the mural. The detail on the right shows the lower corner of the left panel, where you see her working in the other picture, nearly completely cleaned of varnish, soot, and dirt to expose the original light purple curtains that had previously been this murky greenish brown. The time required to clean, fill, and in-paint representative areas of loss was quantified to inform a time and cost estimate for the final stage of conservation treatment to include restoration of areas of missing color and design. Timed cleaning tests indicate that it will require an average of 5 hours to completely clean 1 square foot of painted surface. This adds up to 775 hours, or about 26 weeks, to finish cleaning the 155 square foot mural. These tests confirmed that the paint is stable and well attached to the plaster. In fact, now that the entire wall structure is in a steady and more stable environment, some cracks that had developed through the plaster while the mural was walled up appeared to have closed. Although the cleaning is complicated by a varying sensitivity to the cleaning agents of different colors, it is still possible to safely remove the varnish layers, soot, and grime to reveal the vibrant original colors. However, the longer we wait to clean the discolored varnish and grime, the more difficult and expensive the cleaning will be. Since 2015, efforts have turned from stabilizing and rescuing the mural to ensuring preservation of the mural for future generations to appreciate and enjoy. This can be ensured only if environmental conditions can be controlled to keep the mural from getting too hot, too humid, or too dry. Temperature and humidity conditions have been continuously monitored for the past 5 years using the Preservation Environmental Monitor Data Logger and eClimate Notebook software developed especially for museums and archives by the Rochester Institute of Technology's Image Permanence Institute. This graph shows 4 complete years of temperature and humidity data from 2015 through 2019. The dark blue line on the top is the temperature, and the lighter blue lines on the bottom show the humidity. The green horizontal lines bracket the safe humidity conditions from a low of 30% RH in the winter to a high of 60% RH in the summer with gradual seasonal changes. It is safe for the mural to get cold, but it is best not to exceed 80 degrees during the summer, marked by this orange line. You can see that year-round temperatures and summer humidities fall within the safe region. So here's the summer humidities, here's the year-round temperature. They're all within these safe regions. But the winter humidity conditions circled in red are much too dry, tipping as low as 15%. Plans are in motion to purchase and install a steam humidifier to add moisture to the air to increase humidity to a safer minimum of 30% during the winter. Maintaining environmental conditions within the safe region will prevent the mural from out and flaking off in the future. Following 2 years of intensive conservation and preparation, the rescue of the mural is complete and is safely installed in its permanent exhibition space. Efforts are underway to raise the funds required to complete conservation treatments and establish a permanent exhibit at Mojave Zedek Synagogue to explain the rescue, conservation, and interpretation of the Lost Shul mural and to honor Burlington's historic immigrant communities. I'd like to acknowledge the following individuals and organizations without whom the rescue of the Lost Shul mural would not have been possible. Also, donations can be sent through the Lost Mural webpage, as you see here, or by email to Lost Mural at the Mojave Zedek Synagogue address. And that ends the formal part of my presentation. What we'd like to do next is to ask for your input. There's no question we're going to be cleaning the mural. It's already safely consolidated and secure, the paint is. But there is still some question on whether we're going to compensate the paint that's been lost. As you can see, the early picture, there was some loss of paint in 1986, but after we took down the wall, you can now see a lot more loss of paint, and this exposes the plaster. It shows up as either gray or white. Now, some people think that we should inpaint it so it matches the design and looks much more like this design with the bright new colors or the bright original colors. Another method would be to just inpaint these areas with a block color that's similar to the color you see, so that they're not so distracting. Or the third option is to completely leave it as you see it right now, say this is the damage that's occurred, and that's where it is, and that's all part of the history of the piece. So at this time, you'll see a poll appear on your screen that you can vote for either A, B, or C. So feel free to read these over, and please place your vote. We'll leave this up for about 2 or 3 minutes. You're looking at the overall mural, and here is a detail with the same questions, but just vote once. Okay, I'm going to take this off, go to the last picture, and actually I'll stop sharing my screen now and be glad to take questions.
Thank you, Rick. That was fascinating and so well explained. Do you want to know the results of the poll at this point?
Sure, you can go ahead and announce it.
Okay. So the 61% of our audience voted that they wanted to see answer A, which was that the losses should be inpainted or painted to match the original design of the mural as documented in the 1986 photos. So that was 61% of our audience. And 27% of the audience felt that the the losses should be in-painted with only solid colors to approximate the surrounding paint colors so as to lessen the distraction of the original lost paint. And 11% felt that the white and gray areas should be left as they are currently in order to show the effects of time and environmental conditions on the painted mural.
Thank you, Doris. This has been very, very helpful to get this information. And there's no right answer here. This is really up to the curators in a museum or the congregation that's viewing this every day, the Jewish community, the greater community of Burlington. So all this input is very helpful, especially from this audience. Good.
So I guess this audience will have its role in the going forward. So can you talk a little bit about the cost of this project? It's been in parts. I don't know if you have those figures, but if you have some sense of it, could you let us know about the cost?
Sure. Up to date, it's around $700,000. You know, the cost part was very difficult. It's hard to hone onto these things when you're first starting out, especially when you're working with conservators too. Although one of the main costs was building that structure around the outside of it, the temporary structure, but there was a lot involved. There's still probably about, I don't know, maybe $300,000 to raise, and Beth could, if these were right, others people can correct me, but there's still work to be done for cleaning the rest of the mural and for ending, and we think it's going to be around 300,000. Okay. So that comes out to, you know, total project probably around $1 million. Help.
So more money is needed. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we're trying. It's actually been on hold now for a few years as we start to gear up for another fundraising campaign. You can imagine getting that initial amount of money together was not easy, and had to put some time between that and the second phase.
Okay. Was there any consideration or discussion about the choice of materials being used in the project and whether they were kosher or not? Did that come up?
I saw that question, and not to my knowledge it didn't. The materials were chosen to make sure that the plaster did not fall off that wall during the move, and there was really no discussion of that.
Okay. Okay, and does the committee feel that the placement of the mural is final at this point? Are there any changes that have happened? You talked about an exhibit also in the future, but are there any other changes, or is it in its final place now?
We don't know for sure. It's going to stay in this place for quite a while. It's really a very perfect spot for it. The fact that it fit in this building that was built, you know, how many years after that first building was pretty amazing. And it's part of the Jewish community, as it should be. Ultimately, it's difficult to maintain the type of environment you need to preserve this piece forever, as we're supposed to do. That's a long time, and still used as a public space. I mean, it's the entrance to the synagogue and the entrance to work space. So ideally, it might be best to build a new structure that would be like a museum that could just house this mural, and also a museum explaining the mural, and as a, you know, an honor to and explaining the immigrant community that goes beyond just the Jewish community in this section of town. I think everybody would love to do that. Of course, that really increases the cost by probably a few $1 million. So we're exploring that. They're also exploring, you know, making the space safer environmentally, as I mentioned about the humidification. But I think all options right now are on the table, and we'll try to end up with the very best long-term solution that we can.
Can you talk a little bit about the fundraising efforts that have been done and to whom you've been reaching out? You got a great article in the New York Times a few years ago. And have you reached out to that journalist to see if they want to do an update?
Jeff, can you come on and address that? You'd have to unmute, Jeff. There you go.
There, am I here?
Yeah,
You are?
you are.
Oh, great. We started this new campaign as Rick described. I mean, and in fact, Rick's being somewhat modest. He advised our group that with the hardening of the varnish on the existing mural, we're basically imperiling the potential future to expose the original colors. And as the mural illustrates behind Rick, you know, it's extraordinary. The blue, the purple, and the red, as Aaron described to you last week, you know, are referenced in the book of Numbers. They are the original tabernacle. And the three-dimensional impact, the manner in which the mural just absolutely strikes you when you're standing under it. You just really appreciate its, you know, its majesty. We had put off the fundraising for a while because we were advised by any number of people that it's not particularly sexy to collect money to try and clean a mural. And so we really hadn't given it much thought until we had actually assembled a group of experts in November. Rick presented something similar to the group, museum directors and others from across the country. And it dawned on us that we need to get this work done as soon as possible. And the $300,000 has been a real challenge, but I'm happy to say that at this juncture, we just commenced the campaign as of last month. We're going to commit ourselves to doing the cleaning because that needs to be done as soon as possible. We've collected from our board roughly $26,000. And we're going to initiate a serious campaign of outreach to the 700 plus people who gave us money in the original effort to move the mural. We're hopeful that we'll gain recognition once again. We'd love to get the New York Times and the Times of Israel and any number of public radio and all sorts of folks engaged once again. And I think as Rick has described, what's remarkable is that, you know, exposing the original colors, which are unfamiliar to virtually everyone, you know, who's currently alive. We interviewed lots and lots of people who remember the mural in the 30s, but it had already lost its original beauty. So the game, you know, that we're presenting is that we want to bring the mural back to its original majesty. And the hope is that if and when, and we hope you'll get up to see it, that it will be truly a unique experience to kind of witness his representation of the original Ark of the Tabernacle.
Very. I did have a question. Well, one comment one of our audience said is basically wondering whether there might be grant money going forward from the National Endowment for the Humanities or other federal government sources. So I just wanted to, I don't know, maybe you approach them, and also just want to make sure that you are aware of that comment.
We are, and we welcome anyone who's here and has an idea, please, share it with us. We do have contacts at the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Endowment of the Humanities. We are looking at options, but again, you know, the more people in the know who can advise us, the happier we'd be.
Okay.
And this, we had looked into this before when it was being pretty much sponsored by the by Habizetic. That would have been, we wouldn't have been able to apply for it. But now that it's own 501c3, it does have nonprofit status, and it's not officially a museum yet. But yet, I'm not sure we couldn't apply to NEH, IMLS, or those NEA, even those traditional funding sources. So we're certainly looking at that.
Okay, great, thank you. Do you have any information on the person in whose memory the mural was donated? It might be an interesting side note to Jewish history in the Northeast, and maybe also open a new source for fundraising.
Gosh, Rick, the fellow who purchased the building, Often Hearts, and I can't remember his name. He donated the mural in honor, in memory of his dad, and which was very, very sweet on his part. But I don't know much more about him. Rick, I don't know if you encountered him in your travels.
No, Aaron would know.
Always.
So one of our audience also suggested the idea of setting up sponsorship for each square inch. So in the sort of in fine Judaic tradition of a plaque somewhere that with the name of a sponsor or honoree. So did you follow what I was saying? Basically that you can add, that maybe people want to sponsor, you know, a certain amount being cleaned or finished on the mural, and that people would then be, their name would be listed on a plaque showing their contribution.
I think we've actually pretty close to quantifying that. And I mentioned it takes about 8 hours to clean 1 square foot. And, you know, so you're talking maybe $600 or $800 a square foot. And so, you know, we could break, I don't know if you want to break it down smaller than that, but certainly that's, you know, that's something that we're looking at anything right now, right, Jeff?
We are, and if I may, Eliza has just sent me a note. Steve Often Hearts, who was the generous contributor of the mural, is actually watching, is in class, and so it's a great opportunity once again to express gratitude to Steve for all he's done on our behalf.
Someone sent a note, a question, which I actually, could Betsy Becker unmute herself and ask your question? In the meantime, I'll pass on that last class, when Jeff and Aaron spoke, there also was the suggestion of approaching Ben & Jerry's for a lost mural swirl flavor that Ben & Jerry's could put forward, and to match the color palette of the mural with proceeds to go to the project. So bringing that back. So Betsy, I think you now are in a position to ask your question. I just couldn't quite make it out.
Yeah, it got all messed up in typing, but I was going to talk about the National Endowment for the Arts, but then somebody mentioned it, so I just didn't bother continuing.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And someone else is suggesting contacting the Council of American Jewish Museums, CAJM, which is a subsidiary of the American Association of Museums, to explore the possibility of their involvement. There are about 100 of these entities that are part of CAJM. So that's in it. And then another question, was it customary to have many layers of paint as in the original? Was it customary to have as many layers of paint as in the original mural?
Yeah, actually, the mural paint is only about 2 to 3 layers. All the rest that I showed, the distemper paints, they were the wall paint. You know, a few campaigns of painting the wall before the mural was painted. So the mural didn't go, I don't think, was put up right when the shul was built, was it, Jeff? So it just had regular paint before. So this mural is only about 2 or 3 layers of paint. Probably the heavy varnish on top may even be thicker than the paint.
So I'm going to ask one last question because we're at the end of our time, but I just wanted to clarify. I understood you to say that there was brown in the glaze. Did I understand?
No, what I meant was that the brown areas were the ones that we know had glazes on top.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the brown and some of the darker areas had glazes on top. We'll probably be finding more glazes as we clean other areas. And as you know, the glazes are varnished with pigment in, and you're trying to take dirty varnish off of them. It just makes things a lot more difficult.
Okay, so okay. So I guess if people want to reach Rick to ask him more questions, they can get in touch with the Jewish Studies Center, because I know we couldn't quite get to all the questions, but since our time is finished, we need to close, but be happy to pass them on to Rick if you have questions. And I want to say that the chat is full of so many compliments for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. So thank you very much, Rick, for your bringing it to everyone. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the Jewish Studies Center and to the Washington Conservation Guild. Good night to everybody.
Let me add thanks to Rick and to Jeff and Aaron for keeping the project going. And when this recording is ready, it'll be posted on the website, on the Jewish Studies Center website, so people can see it. And there will be a place in the website also for the way to contact any of the people, Rick or Aaron or Jeff. And again, thank you everyone for a great presentation.